heard from the prophet Isaiah about being the repairers of the breach in the wall, of caring for others, and for living God's Word. And the New Testament reading comes from Matthew verse 6, verses 1 through 6. Beware of practicing your piety before others to attract their attention, because if you do this, you will have no reward from your Abba God in heaven. When you do acts of charity, for example, don't have it trumpeted before you. That is what hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may be praised by others. The truth is, they've already received the reward in full. But when you do acts of charity, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Your good deeds must be done in secret, and your Abba God, who sees all that is done in secret, will repay you. And when you pray, don't behave like the hypocrites. They love to pray standing up in the synagogues and on street corners for people to see them. The truth is, they have received their reward in full, and when you pray, go to your room, shut the door, and pray to God, who is in that secret place, and your Abba God, who sees all that is done in secret, will reward you. May we bless that writing and that teaching to our hearts and to our minds. So after approximately 40 days of Epiphany, where we bask in the glory of the birth of Christ, His life, and His teachings, we now find ourselves moving into Lent. Lent is a time to celebrate in approximately another 40 days, days of waiting and anticipating and refocusing our lives. And the Bible tells us that the Israelites went into the desert, and that then Jesus did the same and went into the desert for 40 days. 40 days of prayer and temptation and fasting and focusing. And it would probably be accurate to say that when Jesus went into the desert, we were on His mind. A time in the desert for Him to prepare for what was ahead. He already knew about Pilate. He already knew about palms and donkeys. He knew about crosses and love and violence. And yet He took this time in the desert to re-energize and to focus on the work ahead of Him, to plan and to prepare and to empower not only Himself but us. So as we walk this journey for the next 40 days, I would encourage you to prepare with Him on your mind. A time to focus on the work ahead of us. A time to plan, to prepare, and to empower, to ensure that we are ready to put His teachings to work in our times. This was a long week for some reason. Friday, as I left the office and waited for the elevator, standing with many people I didn't know, because we're 15 floors of Quicken Loans and Plant Moran and Meridian, and we're all kind of mixed together. This discussion began as we waited for the elevator that it seemed like this week was 100 days long. Everybody was of the consensus that we got to Tuesday and we thought, is this Friday? I don't know what made this week long that way, but it was. And it's been a week of continuous sensory kinds of things coming into my viewpoint and into my hearing. And an interesting way to embark upon this preparation week that begins with Ash Wednesday. Well, more technically, Punchki Tuesday. So Sunday morning, thanks to all of you and Reverend Regina, I was able to sleep in and not have to get up to an alarm. And that's always a great gift. An extra cup of coffee, and then I was off to Lansing, where I met my nephew and his girlfriend for a quick lunch, and then went to People's Church for an ecclesiastical council. It was fun to talk with my nephew and his girlfriend as they talked excitedly about getting ready to graduate and looking for jobs, and she's going to go on and work on her master's at U of M. And so it was just kind of fun to see that energy of youth again as they are preparing to embark upon this important step in their life. And then to go to the Ecclesiastical Council and listen to Melissa, who's had 30 years in ministry with the Methodist Church and was applying for the right to call in the UCC for various reasons, but who spoke so eloquently about grace. And then followed on by Amy, who is brand spanking new, still in seminary, but has such a great enthusiasm. And she spoke of hope. I left early and returned here. And was able to be gifted to witness the many, many, many allies that came out to support our undocumented community. Believe it or not, Sunday night there were a couple hundred people in this building, all in this space, nobody complaining about being squeezed in, allies of every age and gender and color, who ensured the safe passage of the undocumented into the building, and made sure their stories of fear and sadness and concern were heard by not only their allies, but by government officials who were here. And as we all watched over them and watched their tears flow as they filled out paperwork to ensure the guardianship of their children, should they be deported.
Wow.
I was struck by hundreds of people working together, many standing outside in the cold, many inside, but there was no rudeness. There was no difficulty. All were here, knowing full well this was not the only community this could happen to. And more than once, I heard that statement as I walked outside and talked to people. This may be just the first community that faces this. We all need to stand together. Sunday was kind of a day of opposites. To listen to hope and grace and the enthusiasm of these two youngsters, and then to come back to the reality of the difficulties we are facing in the undocumented community. I wonder what Jesus would have thought if he had seen the excitement of the youth and the difficulty and tears and fear of the undocumented folks who were here with us that evening. I suspect, unfortunately, he wouldn't have recognized it immediately. Remember when he was teaching, people drew the sign of the fish in the dirt because they weren't allowed to say they were Christian. In the Roman Empire, many people were allowed to coexist, but not without persecution. So he would have known that pain. He would have known that fear. I think he would have recognized it for what it was. Monday was the longest day on record. I don't know why, but work went on forever. Tuesday, of course, we were greeted with Punchki Day. That Tuesday, the day before we started Ash Wednesday and the journey of Lent, and Meridian was kind enough to make sure we had 15 dozen punchkis on every floor. Punchkis of every kind and description, and people were excited to have those delicious little puffs of marvelous fried dough with excellent fillings and to enjoy that last little bit of gluttony before Lent, to ingest those few thousand calories in a few single bites. And it was a reminder in my mind of the blessings of wealth that this country has, and that those who are working and those who are documented get to enjoy. And as the day progressed, and then the talk began to turn toward what people were giving up for Lent. Some were giving up sugar, some prepared foods, others meat, others alcohol. Well, an interesting thing happened. And since I'm not a big believer in coincidences, it made me sort of chuckle. Because on Wednesday, we arrived at work and found ourselves as part of the boiled water advisory space. Can you imagine 15 floors of workers with not only no drinkable water, but no coffee and no tea for 3 days? Talk about Uberlent. Uberlent, right there in front of us. It was an interesting test of our abilities to get along and to understand how important that drinking water is. It was an important reminder about why people do things like stand at Standing Rock and fight the petroleum industry and fight with the EPA to keep our water safe. We have the largest bodies of fresh water in the world here in Michigan, and it is a daily battle to keep them safe. Tuesday night I watched the first installment of And Then We Rise. It was about the beginning of the LGBTQ coalescing in California and Boston, and then as the episode continued in San Francisco. A journey like so many other groups have taken because they were persecuted or shamed or not properly cared for. It's a journey of happiness and of hope, but of sadness and violence and challenges as well. A journey that has now been a struggle for over 50 years, publicly. A struggle before that privately. And much like my visit to the Suffragette Museum in New York this past fall, I was struck by the fact that the success became possible when groups backed each other. They came together, they worked together. Gay and lesbian alliance with straight women and men, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, young and seasoned, all came together to push for this group to have the appropriate rights. Now, with Stephanie gone to the Middle East, she left me 2 gifts. Her cat and her Amazon Fire Stick. So, I'm getting to enjoy Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, things I didn't even know existed. She just needs to quit telling me to download one more app. But on Wednesday night on Netflix, I watched 13th, a conversation with Oprah Winfrey and Ava DuVernay. DuVernay? And Ava has created a documentary about incarceration and how it affects our brown community. And thanks to the UCC and specifically Walt Kemmler of COGS, I have some insight into this. I've read the Jim Crow books, and because this group, this community also has sensitivity to it, I've heard much of the story around the abuse and the violence and the oppression, but what I never connected the dots in is that the justice system is truly not a fair system for our poor. Not because specifically of race, although it adversely affects people of brown skin more than people of white skin due to the distribution of wealth in this country, but that over 90% of the inmates incarcerated in our jails are there because they took a plea bargain. They took the plea bargain because they couldn't afford an attorney of good enough quality to support them in trial. So therefore, They chose the plea bargain to minimize the amount of time they would be incarcerated. An extension of our Jim Crow laws and of slavery and oppression disguised under the impression that our justice system is fair. They didn't get a jury of their peers. They didn't get an attorney that could properly represent them. In many cases, we have privatized prison systems where they are able to pay or petition the judges to extend sentences to ensure their population. And these poor people and their families in many states, 28, I was surprised to learn, try to go and reclaim the cost of incarceration, which is somewhere between $1,000 and $1,600 a day, from their families. People too poor to have an attorney to begin with. And now you're going to go after the families to pay for the incarceration of this person. %80 of those incarcerated are a shade of brown. It's time. It's time to fix that system. It's time to fix so many systems. There was a first on Delta Airlines this week. Anybody see it? 2 pilots flew together. 2 black female pilots flew a flight together for Delta Airlines. By Thursday, I'd kind of had enough of public news. So I stopped at the public library on my way home and thought, I'm going to get this book on CD, put it in my car, because that way then when I'm driving back and forth to work, I don't have to be assaulted by NPR and any other CNN or anybody else and actually have to be, thinking about this and be cognizant of where my conscience should be. I decided to go hide in a book. So I've always enjoyed Rita Mae Brown. Rita Mae Brown writes fictional mysteries. She always has kind of multiple threads going through it, but the one I always enjoy is she always has animals involved as the characters. And so I thought, this will be good, this will be light. And this is a new one, I haven't read this one. So I snagged it, up to my car I went, and I should have known when I saw the title. The title was called A Nose for Justice. I should have realized when I watched Now We Rise, because one of the statements that was made was that in Boston they had excluded Rita Mae Brown from the NOW organization, National Organization for Women meetings, amongst others, because they were lesbian. The women self-segregated themselves. They did that during the suffragette movement too. They all ended up coming back together in the long run, but I should have realized that Rita Mae Brown isn't the kind of person who just is there to have fun. She has a message. So the story is about a woman named Jeep who'd been flown during World War II as a pilot, now lived in Nevada, had acquired 10,000 acres and many acres of water rights, was raising cattle, and she had grabbed the water rights to help protect the ability to raise food for the growing population. Someone's blowing up the water wells. So this is another water story, a water shortage situation. And she makes this observation. Every political action group, this is as they're trying to decide whose political agenda is fueling this blowing up of water wells. Every political action group is looking for political gain for a portion of the population, and they are often extremely well-led and well-organized. But there is always a portion of this group that is violent, that is disavowed, and whose action the larger group does not acknowledge but directs. These violent or unacceptable acts are a way to make the other actions of the larger whole appear more reasonable. A way to move the center off center. 40 years ago, the center of American political beliefs would appear quite left. But the conservative supporters have been able to move the American community toward the center with great success using this tactic. Of course, now we are fighting amongst ourselves. But the strategy of having a group that pushes the boundaries out really far so that the main body can bring in something that appears more staid and acceptable is an old strategy. And it's been very successful. I had to turn off my radio. Stop listening to Rita Mae Brown. I'm like, really? Come on. What is this week? Why is it everywhere I go? I'm hearing about hostile acts and ongoing issues and chaos in Washington, D.C. and deportation and injustices. So yesterday I saw a story and I really liked this one. It was a grandmother that rescued a police officer. Did you see that story? Police officer is arresting a suspect on a busy street. The suspect starts to struggle with the police officer, and it becomes a life and death struggle as the suspect tries to get to the police officer's gun. People are driving by, nobody's stopping. This woman stops, calls 911, jumps out of her car, jumps onto the back of the assailant, and pretty soon they have things back under control. 5'4" African-American grandmother who said she just needed to save that police officer's life. She didn't stop and think about it. She just did it. And she was honored as a hero in California. There's good people out there. There's good people everywhere. And a friend shared an email with me about a group whose message is being together and persistent and being together, persistent and committed with nonviolence. That's what will turn the tide. And I say that this is what Jesus taught when he returned from the desert. Jesus knew what was ahead of him, but for us, he made the most of his time. He shared all that he knew. He made a safe place for everyone. He could, and right up until his arrest, he did challenge everyone, including his disciples, to stay awake and stand with him. Go back and read the story of the Garden of Gethsemane, and you will see that that was part of the issue. The disciples kept falling asleep. He kept saying to them, stay awake and do the work. So the message in all of these is to stand together, to stand persistent and to stand in earnestness and committed to engaging life. We can't stand back and gather in hopelessness. We can't stand inactive. It's engagement. Engaging those inequities and challenges. This is what we are called to do as Christians. Yes, those obstacles of violence and fear and unfairness will knock us on our heels. If we let them, we'll stay there. If we engage them, we will step forward and we will do what we are called to do as Christians. And so as you prepare your journey of Lent, if you are considering giving up something, let me suggest a few things. How about if you give up fear? God is on your side, and so is this community. Give up the need to please everyone. You aren't going to be successful anyway. So strive to please God. Give up envy. You are already blessed, and your value will never be found in your possessions. It will be found in your relationships. Give Give up your impatience. God knows the timing, and God will put you right where you need to be, just like that grandmother. Give up your sense of entitlement. The world doesn't owe you anything. God doesn't owe you anything. Live in your humility and grace, as Matthew suggested. Give up bitterness and resentment, because the only person that bothers is you. Others don't even realize how you're feeling. Take responsibility for your actions. Give up blame. Give up gossip and negativity. Minimize your contact with people who only share negative and toxic energy. Give up comparing. Everyone has a unique contribution to make. Don't worry about failure. Don't be afraid of failure. You can't succeed in anything if you don't fail once in a while. That's how you succeed. You learn how to do it better. Give up that spirit of poverty, because God always has more than enough. And a good Christian community is always there to support one another. Give up your feelings of unworthiness. You are divinely created. Give up doubt. God can work with you to do anything you can imagine. Give up self-pity. Self-pity weighs you down. You cannot get your work done while you're feeling sorry for yourself. Give up retirement. Because as long as you're still breathing, you're here for a reason. Get to work. Do the things you need to do. They change. But everybody I talk to who's retired says they have no idea how they had time to work, because they're busier in retirement than they ever were when they were working. Give up excuses. Give up making decisions in a vacuum. Talk to others. Build relationships. Join other allies. Give up your own personal pride and be willing to step in and work hard. And stop worrying. Give it up. God's in control. Your worrying isn't going to make it any different. Jesus did not go to the desert and come back to teach us to stand back in fear and to hide. Jesus came back from the desert and taught us to stand up to the challenge. Jesus came back from the desert and he engaged everyone he met. Jesus came back from the desert and had meals and shared stories and included everyone. Jesus came back from the desert and he gathered people together to fight against the challenges of life and the oppression of a few and the tyranny of a few, and to fight fear. So, my friends, you have 40 days. You have 40 days to get your mind together, to prepare for the actions that you will take, to pray, to consider, and to plan, to engage, to love, to teach, to learn. This is how you'll experience grace, and this is how I would encourage you to spend your Lent. Basking in the love of Jesus Christ as you remember how to act together.